Welcome to the Australian First Responder interview series, where we explore the topic of volunteer first responder mental health and how we can look after those who look after us. My name is Dee Milenkovic. I'm a board member of the Australian First Responder Foundation, and I'll be your interviewer today. I'm joined today by Wayde Walker. Wayde volunteers with several emergency first responder organisations and is here today to provide a lived experience account of what it's like to be a first responder. And our very first guest in this interview series is Marie McLeod. We're very excited to have Marie as our first guest. Marie is a qualified social worker, adult education and positive psychology expert. Her work blends positive psychology, neuroscience and appreciative inquiry with extensive experience in community culture change. Marie delivers sustainable wellness solutions to individuals, organisations and communities with a focus on activating wellbeing despite adversity. Today we were talking to Marie about an upcoming documentary she's produced called How to Thrive, where she takes 10 volunteers with mental health issues and helps them all learn how to thrive. Welcome, Marie.
Thanks so much, Dee. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you for being our very first interviewee. We're excited to have you here.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. And for me, this topic is something so dear to my heart. When I began to think about the exploration of first responders, those people who put themselves on the line for their community, those times when we need them most, and the recognition that most of them are also doing other things at the same time. And we're going to hear from Wayde today, who was one of those first responders who just in the pre-interview was telling me all the things that he has on his plate. And one of the things that we know from the research is that people who are those first responders actually have mental health conditions more frequently than the regular population, and that's very alarming to me. So if we think about the fact that here in Australia we have 380,000 first responders and that 240,000 of those are volunteers, but what is alarming to me is the fact that the incidence of mental health conditions for those people who are going out there is, that 1 in 3 are describing that in their lifetime they are experiencing a mental health condition as opposed to 1 in 5 for the rest of us. And in fact that we are losing one of those people every 4.3 weeks to suicide. So this topic packs a lot of punch for me and is definitely something that when I think about my expertise and what I care about, which is how do we help people to thrive despite struggle, this is definitely something that is right up my alley. So thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. And Wayde, tell us a little bit about the volunteer organisations that you are involved with.
So I'm involved with several, as we mentioned, some of which I deal with disasters, and high tensile incidents, like motorbike accidents, stuff like that on motocross tracks, with fires and families and communities that have been affected by disasters, and then also dealing with our staff, our volunteers that are needed to be there on the sites and the effect that it has on them predominantly after or during even their time there.
And how long have you been involved as an emergency first responder?
For someone that is so young, I have been involved I've just celebrated my 31st anniversary with one organisation. So I joined at the ripe age of 9 after being injured myself in a motorbiking accident, and have stayed on and still love what I do every day.
So what is it that keeps you going back after 31 years?
Some people may say you're a sucker or glutton for punishment, but it's the enjoyment, it's the knowing that you're helping someone, knowing that you're getting out, you're doing stuff in the community. You are, you're giving back to the community in a way that they don't actually realise that you're giving it back to them, but you're there, you're helping them, and you're being a shoulder to cry on, a source of support, a medical person that they need in an instant, rather than waiting for an ambulance that could be 2 hours away if they're in the middle of the bush.
And Marie, you've given us some harrowing statistics there about the negative mental health implications for our first responders. And, people may not realise just how many people in our community are first responders, whether paid or in voluntary position. It's a huge population of our community that's involved in this work every day of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And as Wayde described, there are lots of beautiful reasons that people do become involved as a first responder. But as you have detailed, there are these negative implications on their mental health. And as the Australian First Responder Foundation, we're very interested in discussing what the mental health implications are of this voluntary emergency first responder work on our first responders, and looking at what are the elements that contribute to struggle and how we can help people during their time of struggle. So that's what we'd like to talk to you about. Please tell us more about your story and how you got into filming the upcoming documentary.
Thanks so much, Dee. And yes, unfortunately, it is a very sad fact that struggle is something that is familiar to all of us right now living in a global pandemic, but perhaps what we're seeing, in particularly in that first responder population, that this is something that is ever present and a very sort of unfortunate side effect of the beautiful work that they do in the community. So for me, it's a funny thing, because I think in some ways we seek to learn what we most need to know. I guess, I've had my own struggles over the years. I come from New Zealand originally, and I remember from a very young age having this awareness of wanting to help people and wanting to do good, and much like perhaps those people who end up volunteering and first responding. But I started out studying social work and working in child protection and juvenile justice and disability, and very much in that kind of crisis end of things, and focusing on what's wrong with people and how do we fix people and all of those kind of things. And that sort of led me then to sort of doing that at a systems level in communities and in neighbourhood renewal. One of my twins has autism. All three of them have ADHD. One of them has dyslexia. It was crazy times when they were little. And suddenly I found that myself and my family were on the sort of receiving end of service provision. And so I was going along with them to see doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists. I began to experience depression and anxiety, and I didn't like the focus that was coming around, what's wrong with you all? What's the deficit? What's the dysfunction? What's the disorder? How do we diagnose that and fix you? I didn't like it. It didn't feel good, yet it was what I had been doing all those years. And so that was a very important light bulb moment for me, I guess, and what then led me to flick a switch and come to the other side, perhaps, which for me is positive psychology. So once the kids got a bit older and I started to have some space to think and to read and to explore, someone put a book in my hand called Flourish, which was written by Professor Martin Seligman. And that was, he's really the founder of positive psychology. And he begins to suggest, as a psychologist, and that, so much attention is given to what's wrong with us rather than what's strong with us. And I read that book and I really took that on board and thought, personally and professionally, this will change my life. This has been like, you know, taking off one pair of glasses and putting on another in terms of the perspective through which I see the world for myself, and also how I want to help people moving forward. So I guess I started to apply some of those evidence-based strategies from the field of positive psychology in my own life, with my family, and then in ever-increasing circles outward, and beginning to see the enormous difference it made when we flicked the switch around focusing more on people's strengths and their capabilities and what's possible for them, rather than just that kind of deficit dysfunction kind of focus. So that's sort of what happened. And then as time went by, I was invited by one of the big community health services here in Melbourne to create a program using positive psychology for people who were experiencing mental health issues. And so that was incredibly scary for me to think about doing that. Oftentimes positive psychology is used in places where people are already fine, you know, in workplaces or in schools. But my particular interest is, how do we take that positive psychology, or that science of well-being, and apply it when people are in struggle? And so we did that with people experiencing mental health issues, and I created a program that was over 6 weeks. And the results were really extraordinary. And the director at that service said, look, we've never seen anything quite like this. So I knew that I was on to something, and I started to then use that with young people at the Headspace, the Youth Mental Health Service, and the same thing happened. It was around that time that I sort of serendipitously met the filmmakers. They heard about the work that I was doing, and they came along and listened to the young people who had been through the program I was running. And they were so taken aback, I guess, by the changes that had occurred for those young people, that they called me and they said, we want to make a film about this. Now, they had been people who were looking into this for quite a long time, trying to discover, I guess, what does it take to be happy? Is there a sort of secret recipe for happiness? And if so, what is it, and how could we share that into the world? And so they had been sort of, through that research, coming across the field of positive psychology, and realising that whilst there was a lot of good stuff there, it was being held in journals and articles and things that people weren't getting access to, and they weren't being able to learn and live in their lives. And so what attracted them, I guess, to what I was doing is that there was a real life application of how people could take those things and apply them and make a difference. So that's what happened. They then said, you know, do you want to be part of a documentary? But we decided then to sort of gather just ordinary Australians experiencing struggles of various kinds. We have people that are experiencing grief, people who have PTSD, people with OCD, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and just some people who are struggling to feel like they belong, you know, some fairly regular experiences. And we took them on a journey to see whether, if we taught them some of these skills and strategies from positive psychology, they could thrive despite their struggle. And that's been really successful as well. And we'll have that documentary out in early in 2022.
Are there any first responders amongst the 10 people in the documentary?
As a matter of fact, there is a junior doctor, a paediatrician, who is obviously an incredibly busy, stressed human being already, and then he volunteers with St John in his spare time. And so that was an interesting experience, I guess, watching someone who is so time poor and so stressed. As we know, junior doctors is another one of those sectors where there is a disproportionate number of people who are experiencing mental health issues and suicide. And on top of doing that already challenging role, he's then choosing to be a volunteer first responder. So you know, I think that's one of the things that would be great to discuss today is I think what we can see with people who volunteer their time in this way is that it's a good thing up until a point. And what is that sort of tipping point? Where is that sort of threshold where people are giving back, as Wayde said, and we know that to be something that is protective and helpful for our well-being, but where's the tipping point that it begins to become more self-destructive and not serve us?
Yes, so when I asked Wayde, why do you keep going back after 31 years, he was able to list a whole lot of positives that he receives from being an emergency first responder. And I think that part of what Dr. Martin Seligman is saying when he says, let's not focus on what's wrong with you, let's focus on what's strong with you. Perhaps part of the solution to mental well-being, mental and emotional well-being amongst our first responders is to focus on their values and the reasons that they're volunteering. Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, sure. So I guess one of the things that we know is helpful, and Professor Martin Seligman's framework for wellbeing is called PERMA, which stands for positive emotions, engagement, relationship, meaning and accomplishment. And if we think about that framework, we think about the fact that volunteering as a first responder would most certainly come into many of those pillars of PERMA. So first responding for many people would give them an experience of positive emotion, they're helping, they're using kindness, and they have an incredible opportunity for bringing meaning and purpose into their lives and to apply their strengths in the service of others. And there is so much research about the benefits of that in terms of decreasing depression and, you know, our physical health and longevity. And so there's absolutely no disputing that that is a good thing to be doing. I think the tricky thing is how we reconcile that with when people are doing too much of a good thing, it is no longer a good thing. And so it's like, what's the right amount? And it's also about recognizing that if we know that going out and helping others in times of distress is likely or possibly likely to cause us our own distress at times, that we need to be well equipped for that. And so we need to have a mindset going into this that galvanizes us against the potential ill effects for our own physical and mental health.
So let's now turn to exploring that tipping point, and when volunteering as an emergency first responder starts to become dangerous to a person's mental and emotional health. You've spoken about doing too much, being too kind. Speak more about what can take a person from wellbeing in a first responder role to starting to struggle, and how can we recognise this and then, you know, stop it, you know, ideally stop it before it happens. And then Wayde, this is where, you know, we'd really like to hear from you and your experiences over the 31 years that you've been a volunteer emergency first responder. Has it, you know, have there been times when you've been struggling? So
Wayde, to hear from you in terms of, I know that you've had your own personal experience, but you've also worked shoulder to shoulder with many other peers that you've observed over the years. And, you know, for you to tell us a little bit about what that feels like for you and how you've observed that land on others.
So the big thing is that a lot of the stress you go through as a first responder is situational.
Mm-hmm.
So you are dealing with situational stresses based on what you're currently dealing with. The problem that you have is that your situations mount. And as a first responder, you just take it on the chin a lot of the time. And as we all know, the men of years gone by, it wasn't okay to talk.
Mm.
And, you know, that stigma still hangs around in some people due to the way they were raised and their generations and their families. For me, I've had several situational battles through the years, especially when I was younger and I didn't have the knowledge and ability of how to deal with situations. Now, as I've developed that, I've, you know, had psychologists, I've been to social workers, I've had counselling to go through and give me ability to deal with strengths and weaknesses from that. Now you find that it is similar to a burnout factor that you deal with. The most recent major thing was the bushfires of 1920. That they played a huge toll on a lot of people. Yes, we're watching bush burn and that, but you're not seeing, a lot of people weren't seeing the emotional hurt that was going on in the background, whether it be with the community members that have just all been pushed down into Ulladulla, or whether it be the firefighters that were all camped at Grafton or Tenterfield, you know. And then as a community in that little environment, you're all dealing with each other and trying to help each other, and you're trying to deal with the people that are having the struggle that you can physically see because they've gone quiet or whatever. But, you know, the toll that it had on me was the length of time, the lack of available resource to come in and pick up from you in the background and take over to give you a proper stand down time. And then your own personal need to, I don't want to stand down because I need to keep helping the people and the community. And so in a way, you burn yourself out.
Yeah.
And the thing that saved me through that is dealing with my other teammates that were going through the same struggle. Having a daily Zoom meeting, having a live Zoom while we were working, so we could vent, we could talk, we could go through it. At the end of the day, we could have a glass of wine, and, you know, and a debrief, basically. But it does, and it tolls over the years. So years ago, when I was younger, I used to put in every weekend, every waking hour. Basically, I felt I didn't have a life. That was my life. As I've grown, as I've changed, as business gets bigger, you know, stuff like that, you then have them other stresses that come into it, and you push your stress back onto your family. So the other area of concern that I see is not just with the first responders, but what about their families?
Yeah.
They have a lot of stress. You know, I know my family struggle at times to know how to deal with me because I'm hurting, or I'm burning out, or, you know, I'm feeling like I'm not achieving enough to help the community. So I'm getting angry and I'm taking it out on the family.
Yeah. Yeah.
As much as I try my hardest not to take it out on my family, it happens.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's such a heartfelt expression that you've just shared with us about how it feels and the consequences, I guess, of such a, you know, such a brave, such a worthy contribution that's been made. But I think that, you know, the crux of this is that each and every person has a responsibility to hold themselves accountable for their own well-being. And this is not about sort of blaming and shaming, but it is about saying we understand that this role can be very damaging, just as much as it can build us up and it can be protective to give back to others. The sort of the shadow side of that is that it can break us. And so if you are going to be in that role, I think that accompanied with that service mindset and that intent to give back needs to be a very strong conviction about looking after oneself. And so, you know, I think that as a sort of slogan or something like that, we almost need to say, other care without self-care leads to despair, right? Other care without self-care leads to despair. And that I see that, you know, those people who are first responders can be selfless. You know, they can give too much without boundaries. And that, Wayde, you have described that. You've described that sort of drive and that need and that pull to keep giving when there's nothing left. And the remnants are what your family gets, you know, the bits left over. And, you know, I think that I'm going to sort of bravely put out the challenge to those people who are first responders and say to them, you need to hold your own feet to the fire in terms of you need to be able to look after yourself well enough to look after others well enough. And that if you are the person turning up when I have a car accident or when my house is burnt down, I don't want someone turning up who is stressed and burnt out and tired and distracted. I want someone who has looked after themselves and who's done their workout, both in terms of their wellbeing workout and their physical workout. And that there needs to be a commitment to staying well, to staying strong, not just for yourself, because my sense is that people who do this, they might be more likely to look after themselves for others than they will look after themselves for themselves, because it comes with the territory to be a bit selfless. Would you agree with that?
Definitely. And you do see it in people. You see our first responders across all the different services that, you know, they're burnt out. They've turned. You wonder where they got to that point of turning from caring to anger.
Yeah.
They get there, they push you out of the road to go and put the fire out, but not realizing that you're the homeowner, or, you know, the ambulance officer that pushes the family aside and then is abrupt to the patient because they've had the pressures behind them of all sorts of things that have gone on during the course of the day, the week, the month, the year.
Yeah.
And it affects them, and it affects all of us in some way. And sometimes people are so blinkered at what they're doing, they don't realize that they've just pushed that homeowner away, or they've pushed the family out of the way to go and deal with a dementia patient. You know, all that sort of thing. And they don't realize they're being rude and abrupt to a patient.
They've lost their compassion.
They have.
You know? And I think that's where it's about coming back to asking the question, who do I want to be? And to consider, you know, who did I want to be when I started out being a first responder? What was my intent? What was my identity that I was tying that back into? And is that still working for me? Because once I'm pushing people out of the way and I'm so blinkered, I'm not seeing who's the patient, who's the, you know, I'm not noticing and I'm not able to lean in with compassion in those moments, that has been lost. And that is a disservice both to you as a human being and to the others who you serve. And so I guess, you know, when we were to think about, you know, moving this through, I suppose, to what do we do about this? I think that for me, initially, there are sort of two things. There are two components. And one is that acknowledgement that is needed by those of us in service industries. This is not just first responders. You know, this might be me as a doctor, or me as a social worker, or as me as a nurse or a teacher. Those of us who are in service industries where there is me and there is a student, or there is a client, or there is a patient, all of us need to take this kind of oath of, you know, where there is other care without self-care, there is despair. And we, you know, we really need to hold that mindset. And then I think the next step after that awareness and that commitment is that we need to sort of be, we need to armour up. We need to take responsibility for learning and living ways to help us to thrive and to be able to be at our best, physically, mentally, emotionally. And so, you know, that's obviously what I'm in the business of, is, you know, teaching people those evidence-based strategies. And, you know, I certainly would welcome people to reach out. We've created an e-learning and blended learning platform. And so the company that I have is called Thriveability, so the ability to thrive. So if people want to look up www.thriveability.com.au, then you will find that, and you will find access to the e-learning. I feel so strongly about this that if somebody engages in that e-learning and they contact me through the website, that I will offer a free coaching session to anyone who identifies as being a first responder. So I think there is that sort of armouring up, that learning what it is that it takes to thrive and the commitment to applying those things. But then I think there's that constant vigilance about recognising when that point comes, Wayde, that you described, where I start to flip from being compassionate to being sort of judgy or angry or snippety with people. And, you know, we need to be very vigilant about noticing ourselves, but also turning and noticing each other. And so we say, hey, mate, are you okay? This is not you. This is not how you normally are. This is not you at your best. And the moment that that happens, taking steps to rectify it. And that means, as you said about the, you know, the man up kind of thing, does not serve us anymore. So we need to sort of then reach out. First of all, maybe it's those mates and those, you know, people that we are, that are our peers. But beyond that, it's absolutely okay to not be okay, and it's okay to ask for help. And we need to make promises to ourselves to do that.
So, Marie, you've spoken about the importance of us taking responsibility and realising that our mental and emotional health and wellbeing is paramount if we're going to be of use to anyone else. But as we've all acknowledged as well, it's really difficult to stop when there's work to be done. It's really difficult to stop when you care so much about an issue. And Wayde has spoken about that. But what Wayde also spoke about was how important it is to have that debrief with your peers at the end of the day, that chat and that phone call, that, you know, how you doing, mate? And so, you know, this peer support model is what the Australian First Responder Foundation is based upon. Our founder, Louise Murphy, has studied the peer support model internationally and has adopted the peer support model as the foundation for all of the work that we do here with the foundation, because it's been scientifically proven that that support, that interaction with your peers, is something that can that can halt the decline in its place. It's something that can be used as a strategy to keep people healthy and functioning throughout. So, you know, what we're hoping to do with the Australian First Responder Foundation is to create a community of shared experiences, understanding, compassion and support for each other. Wayde, can you speak more about the importance of peer support for you? How has the support of your peers helped you through these past 31 years?
And your peers are amazing because they are going through the same thing you're going through. And you can develop strategies together on how to deal with this. And especially with those that you work with so closely all the time, you know, so whether it be a local emergency group, that they're a small team, they work together, they know each other, they know each other's limits and abilities, and where, you know, they know if someone's out of sorts. Peer support for me in amongst my own team has been massive, it is one of the biggest thing that helps to just deal with the initial issue. The head issues that come after that are where you go in and go to your VEAPs or your own psychologist or social worker or stuff like that, or go and look for resources, whether it's through Are You OK or Beyond Blue or something like that, to help deal with what is currently going on. I can't say enough about peer support for members of organisations, and it's only an evolving trend in organisations now. It hasn't been something that has been around for a long time. St John Ambulance have had it for several years. The Rural Fire Service are starting to develop it. They have had chaplains, but that was only dealing with death. The State Emergency Services, people like that, Marine Rescue, they're all just starting to develop these peer support programs based on the evidence that we're given, and because of the information of the difference between peer support or struggling and the grounds in between what is a struggle and what is peer support. You know, where do we keep that in the middle? Where is that common ground to your team?
Yeah.
Marie, how does peer support intersect with the work that you do with positive psychology?
Absolutely, as Wayde said, and you said as well, like that intersection between, you know, you sort of giving a nod to the research and Wayde's sort of lived experience of what it feels like to belong and to be part of a tribe. So my model for wellbeing is called Beacon, that idea that we need to look after ourselves to shine our brightest for ourselves and for others. And the first beacon beam is belonging. So it stands for belonging, engagement, accountability, compassion, optimism, and nurture. So the very first of those beams, belonging, is really at the core of this peer support model, where really foundational to us being able to thrive and to be at our best is having a tribe, having a Thrive tribe, and having people around us where we can feel seen and safe, and to be soothed when we suffer. And what Wayde is describing is very much that. It's a tribe that we go out, we've walked in each other's shoes, we know what it feels like to show up in those kind of crisis situations, and we can be there for each other. And my hope is that enables the sense of authenticity, the sense of shared vulnerability, where we can just let it all hang out. We can say, mate, you know, I am smashed. Like, I just found that so confronting, and I need to talk about it, and to take the filters off and really break down and cry, as Wayde said, you know, have a shoulder to cry on, and to be able to do that in a way where there is no judgment. It feels completely psychologically safe to just be what you need to be in that moment, because Wayde describes so beautifully what happens when we don't do that, is that we get this cumulative effect of the stress and of the trauma, and we end up burning out, and we can't do what we do anymore when we're burnt out. So, you know, for me, that would be, you know, one of the number one things that we would say is have that Thrive tribe, and hopefully you have peer support in your organisation or who you volunteer for. And also, you know, have that outside of that as well. Who else are the people that, you know, that support you and where you feel like you belong? And I think just, you know, one of the other tricks about that is that we need to create time and space for that, and we need to protect it like our life depends on it. So, you know, I don't know, Wayde, if you notice this, but sometimes we might think, oh, I'm too busy to go on that Zoom, or I'm too busy to stay for a drink after, you know, this event is over. I'm exhausted, I've got to go home. But we need to prioritize that, knowing it is one of the strongest ingredients. And we need to actually make sure that we're present for it. You know, we need to catch each other's eyes, you know, we need to use eye contact, and we need to be really there, you know, not sort of off thinking about the next thing on the to-do list. So I'm definitely a big supporter as well of that peer support approach and getting your Thrive tribe.
I'm going to ask you both to give me your top hints and tips on how the general public can start cultivating wellbeing in their lives, because there'll be people listening today who are not emergency first responders, who are perhaps family members of first responders. Marie, can you give our listeners some practical tips on how they can start cultivating wellbeing in their life? Where do we start, and how can we include positive psychology into our everyday lives?
I think that whether you're a first responder or anyone else, these kind of things right now, going through what we're all going through, are relevant to all of us. I think what we're identifying today is that for those people with more struggles and stress, it's even more important. So one of the things that I would say, a continuum of our well-being, and generally psychology looks at us when our well-being becomes suboptimal, when we sort of fall below zero and we're down in the -5 or -10, the 0 to +10, what the research shows in there, really about us beginning to think about the experience of having some positive emotions. So what I mean by that is that our brain functions best when we are having opportunities to do things that lift us. And so what I would ask people to do is to take a stock of what a standard day or a week might look like for them, and to think about in my life right now, how much space is there for things that lift me, or how many of these things are have to do things versus want to do things. And we know Wayde spoke about this before, again, saying, I just wasn't living life. And so someone who's saying that is absolutely just burning the candle at both ends, and they're potentially not doing those little things that bring what I call a jolt of joy. Those moments that they're just small moments, the micro moments when we notice or we intentionally lean into things that make us laugh or make us feel pride or joy or hope or serenity or gratitude. These little micro moments really are the engines that drive our well-being. So if you take a moment just to think about, what would my ratio be at the moment? How many times am I feeling heart-straining stress versus that sort of heartfelt lightness that I get? And then just going, what are things that do that for me? It might be silly stuff. It might be watching funny cat videos. It might be calling a friend. It might be eating a cake out in the sunshine or going for a walk in nature. You need to identify what those things are and intentionally insert those back into your days so that your ratio gets more balanced. Because if you don't do that, then you're shutting in on yourself with those blinkers that Wayde described. You can't problem solve, you can't connect, you can't create, and you don't bounce as well through the tough times. So that's sort of, one thing. I guess the other thing that I'd like to suggest for all of us, but first responders maybe especially, is how do we think about transitioning from the roles we play in our life? Again, Wayde talks about the fact that he has, a full-time job as a business manager for not one, but a couple of companies. And then he volunteers in multiple organizations. He's on boards of others. There are so many hats that he wears. And then he's a husband and he's a family member. So how do we transition between those things? And the tip here comes from Dr. Adam Fraser, and it's called the third space. How do we create space as we move between those different things? If I've been out fighting a fire or at a car crash, and I'm coming home and I'm about to be husband or about to be father or family member, how do I do that? And so there are sort of 3 steps, I guess. The first one is to take a moment to reflect. Where have I been? What went well? What did I bring to that made a difference for other people? And that's just a little moment of celebration and of taking a moment to say, what I did we worked in this way, and I want to have gratitude for myself in that moment and for the strengths that I brought to the situation. So that's reflect, and then rest. So the mindful moments, the spaces in between where I take a bit of a walk before I come back home. I change my clothes, I listen to music, I talk to a friend, I sit quietly and do some breathing before then resetting to go into that situation and asking myself, who do I want to be? How do I want to show up in the situation that I'm going into? So if I am going into a first responder situation versus I'm being husband or dad at home, then they're different, right? They require different intentions from me. So putting some space in between those things as we change hats between the different roles, and creating space just to be sometimes, and letting go, recognizing, what doesn't serve us. Wayde, does that make sense? Is that credible advice, do you think, for someone like you?
Definitely. I find coming home from something, I sit and do a little, as I'm driving along, I sit and do a little analysis. The music's playing in the background, but I'm not particularly listening to it. It's just there. But I'm doing a little analysis. I'm unwinding myself.
Yeah, perfect.
And then hopefully by the time I get home, I've changed my mindset and I'm back to a better spot. Occasionally now, I'd say occasionally I come home and I'm not unwound because I haven't had a great enough trip. I've gone and done events where I've had to drive 2 days to get to them, and you have a great unwinding time to come home. But, when you're only just going 15 minutes, it may not be enough to unwind. So I have put tactics in place before where I've been to something big and I've only been 5 minutes from home, but I've stopped at the local park, had a coffee and unwound myself before I got home. So taken half hour to get there. Do that little bit of extra self-care in that respect.
Beautiful.
It helps you take that hat off. So there's a lot to be said for living 5 minutes from work. It's brilliant, but it does not give you time to unwind.
Perfect.
Before getting home.
For those of us in lockdown at the moment, we're not even allowed out of the house for 2 hours. So it's extra difficult to create that space. When we're not driving to and from work. We can't even walk too far away from home. So what are some, we'll have to resort to creating some kind of a space within our home.
Well, the thing is, it doesn't have to be a physical space, and it's a really good point that you raised, Dee, because a lot of people that I coach at the moment are having the same experience where they are not having that travel time that Wayne described. There is no sort of commute to allow that wind down in that third space. And so what people are doing is, what I'm talking to them about is putting handles on your work day, making sure it has a start and it has a finish and there's a little space in between. So, it can be as simple as actually changing one's clothes, from their work attire into their, relaxed attire. Or it might mean when I'm going to transition from work, I might walk out one door, and if I'm not allowed to go out here in Victoria, we still would be allowed to do a walk, within our 5K, but it might be walking out my front door and walking around the house and coming in the back door, and maybe resting a little bit in between and doing that sort of reflect, rest and reset. But it's just about intentionally having the handles on and then saying, okay, what do I need to do to put some space and to think about who I want to be in this next interaction? And I think it is very important in this working from home era that we're now in.
Maybe we can take a leaf out of Clark Kent's book and step into a telephone booth, or if we don't have the telephone booth, which I'm guessing we don't, step into the walk-in wardrobe as Clark Kent and then step out as Superman.
I love it. Or can I add something laughing to that actually, Dee. So one of the other strategies we think about, it just made me laugh thinking about you changing into Superman, Wonder Woman, right? So, you know, the Wonder Woman pose where we sort of stand with our arms up and we make ourselves really big. And so arms up, looking up, that very empowered pose that we can hold is also a really positive strategy to help us to go into situations where we think it might be challenging for us. So this comes from Professor Amy Cuddy's work, and what we know is that if we hold ourselves in big, strong power poses, we feel more confident, we feel more courageous. And so if our next situation that we're entering into, let's say it's a first responder environment and we know we're going into something really tricky, to hold ourselves, you know, it's like the pose that people do when they win, you know, their arms are up, their face is up, they're like, yes, I've got this. Yeah, there we go, there's what I do. And so at the same time, if we are repeating things to ourselves, you know, I've got this, I'm enough, I've got what it takes, you know, I've got my crowd around me, you know, that can be another sort of helpful thing. So maybe it's the Wonder Woman pose, the Superman pose that might be helpful as well as we transition between these different states and experiences in our days.
Look, thank you so very much for the conversation today. We've learned a lot of really useful information that I think people can take away and try, implement into their own lives. I'll come back to you in a moment, Marie, but I'll go to Wayde. And Wayde, again, thank you for being so vulnerable in sharing your firsthand experiences as an emergency first responder. You've talked about the good, and as well as the struggle. Is there anything you would like to say as a goodbye, and any kind of advice that you may have for emergency first responders who may be struggling out there at the moment?
I think that the big thing that our first responders need to remember is that you are human. You do have emotions.
Yes.
You do have feelings, but there are also people there that are willing to help you.
Yeah.
They are willing to be your shoulder to cry on. I don't care if you're 65, the biggest bloke in town, you don't show emotion, you've got emotions.
Yeah, beautiful.
Remember that, and remember there are always people there to care and help care for you and help you care for yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you, Wayde. Thank you. And Marie, you've given us lots of really valuable information coming from the field of positive psychology and how we can use that scientific evidence to bring wellbeing into our lives. Is there anything you'd like to tell us about that I haven't asked you about yet?
I just, I probably would just like to back up Wayde and say that we are all perfectly imperfect. We all struggle, and if we don't admit to that, we're lying. And maybe if we're not experiencing struggle, we're not living life on the edge, you know. And I think that people who are first responders are so generous, and I just want to say, hand on heart, thank you. Thank you to people like Wayde who put their own lives on the line and who contribute so much despite being so incredibly busy. And I want to just implore you to please look after yourselves as much as you look after others. I guess it's that sort of concept that Wayde's saying about, I might call it self-compassion. It's about recognizing your own struggle. Please stop in the same way that you would observe in a crowd when someone starts to falter or fall. Please, show that same kindness to yourself. The moment that you might notice your own struggle, that you take steps to soothe your own struggle, that you reach out and you ask for help, and that you realize that that is just part of the human experience. And there's no shame in that. So I personally would like to say that, I am here to help anyone that might want to learn more about what to apply in their own life. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here with you and Wayde today, and I look forward to furthering this conversation again in the future. It's such an important topic.
Thank you, Marie. And tell our viewers where they can find out more about your documentary and find out more about your work and perhaps access this free coaching session you're generously offering to us today.
Sure. So my email address is Marie, M-A-R-I-E, @Thriveability. So just Thrive, T-H-R-I-V, ability.com.au. And on the www.thriveability.com.au, you will find access to me, to the e-learning, and also the trailer of the documentary. There's a 3-minute trailer that you can find there, and that documentary will be coming out early next year. So we'll keep you posted on that, and we'll put some information in the tip sheets and everything when this goes live.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Look forward to having a look at that documentary. Thank you both very much for joining us today as our very first guests on the Australian First Responder interview series. The advice you've given us and the personal experience you've shared has been really touching. Thank you so much. And I know we're going to help a lot of people with this. Thank you and stay well.
Thanks so much for having us, Dee.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dee.
Bye, Wayde.